Manor Lords is all about building up your own medieval town, all the way from your first handful of basic houses to a full-scale bustling city complete with walls and towers. But doing all of this takes time and a bit of know-how, so today let's go through the complete beginner's guide to Manor Lords. Let's start with game setup. I don't want to spend too much time here since I know most people will just want to get straight to the game, but I do want to mention just a couple of things. First of all, once you've created your lord and flag, you'll be able to set up the specific conditions of your game, and along the top, you can choose from one of 3 scenarios. If you're new to the game and want to get to grips with the basics, I would advise choosing the Rise to Prosperity option for your first game. This is completely free of any combat and will allow you to get to grips with the rest of the game's systems and how to build up a town without worrying about defending it from invaders. Think of this as playing on peaceful on Minecraft whilst you learn how to make a dirt house and place torches. Aside from this, you can also choose from one of 3 pre-made difficulty settings. I would advise you to stick with default when getting started, as it'll help you go to speed quicker rather than learning bad habits first. That said, if you try this and you are really struggling, there's no shame in turning things down. For the video, I'm going to start out with a default Rise to Prosperity, then switch over to Restoring the Peace later once we get to combat. But with that said, let's get started and create our first town. In every game, you'll have the same set of resources and UI elements to help you build up your town. I again won't spend too much time on this since I know everyone really wants to get to the gameplay, but it's important to know what everything means since it's not all that obvious. Along the top, you have 2 bars separated by your town's name. On the left, you have everything to do with your population. Unassigned families will work on construction and work your cattle to transport large resources like timber. Assigned families are those that have been specified to work in a specific place and will not help with construction or transportation of goods. Living space is the total number of families your region can support. Total population is the number of people in your region, and hovering over this will show you a breakdown of their levels and genders. This tooltip also tells you the growth speed of your town, which is dictated by your approval. This is essentially how happy your population is and is dictated by the quantity and variety of goods available to them, as well as availability of churches, taverns, and homes. This not only affects your growth, but also the morale of your combat troops. Public order is slightly different and is the likelihood of crimes occurring or your people turning into bandits. I don't believe this is actually functional in the game yet, as the only thing that I found to affect this was building administration buildings, and it never fell below 90. Regional wealth is the amount of money villagers have to spend in the region. This is used for trading goods as well as building certain more advanced buildings and upgrades. It's produced by exporting goods as well as monthly from families tier 2 and above. Livestock is the number of animals you have in the region. Oxes, horses, and mules live in stables and assist with transportation of goods, whereas sheep and lambs live in pastures and produce wool and other goods. Lastly, the number of months before supplies run out is pretty obvious. It breaks down how many months of food and fuel your region has before they run out. If you notice it's getting low, then it's probably time to increase your production of either. In the middle of this top row, you have your settlement's name as well as the requirements for advancing to the next tier. Clicking on this will take you to the development menu. From here you can spend development points earned by increasing your settlement's level on various skills to enhance your town. This can be upgrading existing buildings or unlocking entirely new ones, and I'll cover these in more detail later as for which are the best options. Back to the top row now. On the right, you have all the resources in your settlement stores. You can toggle between total goods and surplus using the button on the left. Total is how many resources there are in the entire town, and surplus is how many free resources there are, so it gives you a bit more of an idea of what you have to work with. Basically, everything here is gained through the same methods of buildings and or trade, and I'll cover the more complex items in detail later. Construction goods are obviously used to build and upgrade buildings. Food is consumed by your population. Fuel is used to run certain industrial buildings and keep your pops warm. Crops are your raw farmed materials like wheat as well as animal dung. Crafting materials are all intermediary items that are then used in further crafting to make a final product. Commodities are advanced products which are required for more advanced pops and often fetch high prices when trading. Lastly, military shows all of your available resources for outfitting your soldiers. In the top right corner you have your lord as well as a few other resources. Treasurer is the money your lord can spend on diplomacy and other advanced options. Annual royal tax is how much your lord has to pay per year to the rule of the region, if that's applicable to your scenario. Influence is mainly used in diplomacy as well as when claiming new regions for your lord. This is gained mainly from your churches and manors. And lastly, King's Favour is used for diplomacy and is also not entirely in the game yet since I found no way to create or use it. Finally, on the bottom we have a number of buttons, and these are all super simple to explain. Roads lets you build roads. Obviously. In Manor Lord, these are pretty freeform and you can adjust their curvature with control and mouse wheel, which makes some pretty fun shapes. Construction is how you build all of your buildings in-game from homes to industry. Just pick what you want and place it where you want and your people will get to work building it. Army is where you can view your available troops and ready them for combat when needed. I'll cover more about combat later on, so don't worry about this too much when getting started with the basics. Map takes you to the zoomed out overview of the entire map, allowing you to see all other regions, their layouts and resources. In certain scenarios you'll also be able to see any neighbouring factions as well as bandits and interact with them. Help can give you a bit more information on almost everything in the game, but I found this to be a little bit basic, hence why I'm making the video. But it is very useful when you need to craft a certain item and you don't know what the requirements are. And finally, settings lets you adjust the settings of the game without going into the escape menu, which is a pretty nice feature, albeit a little bit unnecessary. Lastly, in the bottom right, you have speed controls, and these can also be adjusted with the Z and X keys. Okay, all of that's covered. Now, we can finally get into how to start your first game. Upon loading into the map, you'll be given a set of homeless tents where your 5 families are currently living, alongside some uncovered resources. When you start any game, you need 8 things built to lay down the foundations of your game. And I know 8 sounds like a lot, but most of these you'll not need to build more of for a fairly long time. The first and most important thing you should build is a logging camp. This is how you'll maintain a steady income of logs, which will be used for basically all of your early game construction. To build this, you click on it from the construction menu under the Gatherers tab and place it anywhere you like, within reason. Now you can technically build anywhere, but to start off with, your people are going to be going back and forth from this building a lot in their storage at the start, and when you want to grow fast, this can be a real choke point. I'd say somewhere relatively close to your starting area and the place where you plan to build homes will be perfect. You'll also want to connect this to the road network to make sure resources can be transported back and forth nice and quick. Once this is built, you'll need to assign workers, and in Manor, this is done by families. Each home or burridge will house at least one family, so assigning one to work in a workplace essentially means that entire house will be working there. So once the logging camp is built, you'll have a steady income of logs and can use those to build everything you need to get started. Personally, I don't see any reason why you shouldn't just put the full 3 families on this to get started, since it'll get you plenty of logs nice and quickly at the start, which you will always need. You can always reassign them later, so it's no problem. Next, I'd prioritize 5 houses for your starting families. Technically, you can let them live in the homeless tent or upgrade it to a worker's tent, but this will result in low approval, which will slow your growth down for quite a while, so avoid this if you can. House building in Manor works a lot differently to pretty much any other city builder. Instead of zoning like City Skylines or building individual houses like Banished, it's somewhere in between. You create a burridge zone, and within that zone, you select the total number of houses you'd like to be built. If you reduce the number of houses, then each one will gain a larger plot, with the option to house multiple families on one plot, but as far as I could tell, this was just cosmetic rather than affecting anything in particular. As well as extra space, burridge plots can also have an extra working plot at the rear as indicated by this icon. It took me far too long to realise this is how you create certain advanced resources, so don't be like me and make sure you leave room for these in at least your first few houses, but ideally in all of them, because why not? Anywho, as long as you select a large enough area to make 5 houses with working plots, your people should get to work building their homes in no time. As well as sorting them somewhere to live, they'll also need 3 resources. Food and fuel will be covered by your starting supplies, but not for long. Water, however, will need to be provided from day one, so make sure to build a well nearby to your homes. These can only be built on underground water deposits, so make sure you scout this out before you place your homes to ensure your population doesn't have to walk too far. As for the food and fuel, they'll be able to collect these from the marketplace, which is built just the same as house plots, but now you can see how many store locations you'll have available. I'd say 10 is a good starting number, so don't go too crazy making anything too large. To get your starting resources available to this marketplace, as well as out of the elements where they can be damaged and destroyed, we should also build some storage. These are super simple. A storehouse for construction materials, the granary for everything market related. Build and staff both, and they'll collect your starting resources and get everything you need to the marketplace, but they won't last for long. You'll very quickly need to start producing both fuel and food. People need food to survive, but also a variety. To start off with, you'll likely lack the workers to staff both a hunting camp and a gatherer's hut, so build one whilst making a mental note to build the other once you have enough resources and people. Both of these starting options require resources from deposits on the map, so choose based on which is closest to your base camp. Just the same as a logging camp, make sure it's staffed, otherwise you'll get nothing. Fuel is much simpler, just build a woodcutters camp, staff it, and you're off to the races. One quick tip for woodcutters and logging camps, if you head to the advanced tab, you can select their work area, and I'd highly advise you do so. You can do this to clear out areas you'd like to build in, as well as keep the trees around nearby to berry and wild animal deposits. If these are totally deforested, they'll become unusable, so make sure they're protected. With that, your town should be relatively sustainable and your approval should steadily be rising. With all going to plan, we can focus on growing our town both in terms of population, but also the level of these pops. Growing your population in Manor is relatively simple. If you have high approval and spare burridge plots available, people will eventually move in and increase your population. Now, the reason this is relatively simple instead of actually simple is that raising approval can be quite tricky, especially at the start. Once people are housed, they'll stop being unhappy, but to push them to being actually happy, you'll need a few more things. You can see what exactly each tier of pop wants by clicking on a burridge plot. These are also the requirements to unlock the options to upgrade pops to the next tier, but they're also a good indicator of approval, so reference these if you're suffering from low approval but can't work out why. First of all, they want a variety of foods available. As I said earlier, you can gather berries and hunt for meat, but both of these have some downsides. To avoid hunting animals to extinction, you'll only be able to hunt so many animals per month, slowing the income of meat significantly. Berries, on the other hand, grow back, but once winter hits, they'll disappear until spring comes back around. This does mean you'll want to add and remove staff from the gatherer's hut as the seasons roll around, otherwise they'll do nothing for you for 3 months every year. So, getting some alternatives on the go is very advisable to keep your population fed, happy, and healthy. If they only eat one food type, they're also more likely to get sick, so variety is a must. You can start working on some farms which will provide a lot of crops all at once, but will take a year per cycle, as well as coming with a couple of their own complexities. First of all, when placing a field, you'll be able to see how fertile the land is for your selected crop type, and you can switch between these on the right. Try to place fields that are about 1 morgan at max size, otherwise they'll be too large for your pups to effectively work, without a bunch of families being assigned per field. Also, make sure they have high fertility for at least 2 of emmer, barley and flax. If you continually grow the same crop in the same place, the soil degrades, so switching between crops or having a field empty for a year is the way to go to maintain a high yield. Fields also get their workers in a more unusual way than other jobs. Instead of assigning them per field, you instead build a farmhouse and assign workers there, who will then go out and work all nearby fields. Emmer, or wheat, is the only crop that can actually be made into food, so prioritize this first, followed by the other 2 with equal priority since you'll end up needing both of them at the same time later. Once food is harvested, you'll need to process it in a windmill into flour, and from there into a communal oven into bread. This takes a long time and a lot of workers, but can provide you with a lot of food all at once. Just make sure you have some stability to get you from harvest to harvest. If you left room for working plots at the rear of your burrages, you'll also be able to click on them and select from one of 3 options. Vegetable gardens work like farms, providing vegetables every year, but they do occupy the inhabitants, essentially consuming one of your unassigned families. Chicken coops, however, provide passive egg income, so a great option for the early game when you're normally struggling for workers anyway. Goats are another option, but they provide passive hides instead of food, so you can leave these for a little bit later. We will need them, but to start off with, food is much more important. That said, after food, the next easy thing you can do to raise approval is provide basic clothing options for your population. If you have a hunting camp or goats, you'll be collecting a steady income of hides. These can be used in the tannery to create leather, which will fulfill the basic clothing need of a level 1 pop and keep that approval rising. Next, you can build a church. This will require some wood planks, which will need to be crafted in a sawmill, but this sawmill won't always need to be staffed, so you can just have it working until you have enough, and then reallocate the workers elsewhere. Once your church is built and staffed, it'll provide church access to all nearby homes, increasing approval as well as fulfilling one of their upgrade requirements. Once all this is done, you should have much higher approval, so just build more burrages if you need more population, and they should move in fairly quickly. Just be careful of building too many homes too fast, as more pops also means more demand for goods, so if you can't keep up, you can quickly fall behind and freeze your progress for a good long while. As long as you have enough pops working to fill the needs of your higher tier pops, you should be just fine. At this point, you'll likely have some burrages ready to be upgraded to tier 2, and this is as simple as selecting them and clicking upgrade. Once completed, this new tier 2 burrage will have an increased list of demands for the next upgrade, as well as high approval. You'll need even more variety of food, higher tiers of clothing, a better church, as well as a tavern. We've already covered food variety, so just start production of another option you're not making yet, and make sure it's in enough quantity to go around. Higher tier clothing is a little bit more complicated. To craft these items, you'll need a level 2 burrage with a working plot and build the cobbler's workshop. You can build a tailor, but that will require another industry building, whereas the cobbler can work with your tannery, so it saves you some time and space. Once built, the inhabitants of the house will begin using leather to craft shoes, and once these reach the market, you should be fulfilling the clothes needs of tier 2 citizens. The church upgrade is also fairly straightforward, but you'll need some advanced resources to do it. Stone and clay deposits will appear in your starting region. You can build the stone cutter camp close by to a stone deposit, and they'll collect stones for use in building. Clay will require you to build a mining pit on top of the deposit and then a clay furnace to turn them into roof tiles ready for use. This sounds like you'll need 3 extra workers, and while this may be true, you don't need a constant income of either of these, so you can simply move workers around the 3 to get everything you need, and once everything is ready, upgrade the church. Just the same as before, it'll fulfill the church need and raise the approval of all nearby pops. Lastly, tavern supply. This will obviously require you to build a tavern and stock it with ale, which is quite the process. Building the tavern is fairly simple since it's just 5 logs, and once it's staffed, it's ready to go. However, without ale, it'll do nothing, so hold fire on assigning workers just yet. The production shell for ale is as follows. Ale is made in the brewery, level 2 working plot, and requires malt. Malt is made in the malt house, industrial building, and requires barley. And barley is farmed on fields, so you'll need each of these steps in place before you can finally staff your tavern. Stock it with ale and keep your people happy. And unlike these stone and clay, these will need to be constantly working to constantly keep your people happy and stocked with ale. That said, however, chances are you probably won't be harvesting enough barley to keep both your malt house and your breweries busy all year round, so you can reassign workers as and when you need. But with that, you'll be ready to upgrade to tier 3, which is the final tier currently available in the game. Upgrading to this tier requires wealth, some of the more advanced construction materials we mentioned earlier, and doubles the plot's capacity for families. The only new requirement at this tier is even more food variety, so as long as you have 4 kinds regularly coming in, you should be just fine and have an easy peasy high approval. Trade is the other way to get a hold of basically any resources you need, but obviously it doesn't do this for free. You'll need plenty of regional wealth to import a decent amount of anything, and earning that much from passive income will be nearly impossible. Instead, you'll want to export anything you can produce a large amount of and can live without. For example, if you have a rich iron deposit, you can make a lot of iron slabs and export these, or go one step further, make them into tools or weapons and export those. I would advise against exporting food unless you have a massive amount of excess, as it can quickly come to bite you if you start to run low and have sent all your stock to be sold. Less advanced goods can be traded immediately once you have a family working at your trading post, but some more complex goods like tools and weapons require a trade route to be established. These cost varying amounts of gold, but once they're in place, you'll have a guaranteed way to import or export that product on a regular basis. You can lock the maximum price of a trade route to 25 using the Trade Logistics Development Point, and in this build of the game that I was playing on, this is basically essential, since otherwise you can be paying nearly 4 times this for certain routes. While we're here, real quick, I'll go through the 4 trees and their options for development points. These are currently very basic and not all the way fleshed out, so chances are things will change if you're watching this in the future, but here's what we have now. At the top, it's all farming focused, so unlocking orchards for building your working plots to produce apples, unlocking rye for use in your fields, upgrading your field's efficiency and the ability to have bakeries in your working plots, which is far more efficient than the communal oven setup. On the left, you can upgrade hunters and gatherers, as well as unlock apiaries to create honey and wax. On the right is trading, and you can reduce the price of trade routes, as I mentioned earlier, as well as set up permanent stores to provide firewood and bread at the cost of wealth and reducing the cost of importing goods. Lastly, at the bottom is military and metalworking with upgrades to unlock a more efficient fuel source, create infinite mines, and the ability to craft more advanced pieces of armor. If you ask me, other than the trade logistics option, the other must picks are heavy plow and charcoal burning. The plow will allow your farmers to use an ox to plow your fields much quicker, meaning less people can work on more fields and produce more goods, and the charcoal burning will allow you to create charcoal, which does add another step to the chain from firewood, but is much more efficient and saves the trees just a little bit. Other than that, it all comes down to your own game and what you need or want to create. As for policies, it's incredibly basic. The 2 that are in game right now, I never really thought any need to use since they both have drastic trade-offs that weren't worth it to me, but they are there and will probably change later to be more useful in future, so if you're watching this in the future, check them out. They're probably quite useful. You just have to have a read because I can't see into the future, so I don't know what they are. At the moment, the diplomacy system is incredibly basic, and the only real interactions you'll be making are war declarations and fighting over plots of land. Heading to the map screen, you can get in contact with any of the other leaders in your game. Declaring war will cost a lot of influence, so building up plenty of stock of this will be necessary in more combat-focused scenarios. There will also be bandits alongside other lords, and these are single camps spread out across the map that will periodically steal your resources until they are wiped out. Whether you're fighting other lords or bandits, getting your troops ready for combat and using them in battle works pretty much the same. To create units, you need the people and equipment for that specific unit type. For example, the spear militia needs spears and large shields. The unit size is also 36 men, but if you don't have enough population or equipment, you'll just create the maximum unit size that you can afford instead of getting locked out. Weapons, shields, and armor are all created much the same as most advanced resources. You'll need a tier 2 barrage or higher with a working plot to create the blacksmith's workshop for weapons, armorers for metal armor, joiners for shields, and fletchers for bows. Each of these will require their own set of materials, so use the help pages to see what exactly you'll need, make sure you're creating plenty of it, and they'll be off to the races. You can also choose to hire mercenaries, which will cost you treasury per month to keep them in service, making them quite costly in the long run and more suited to a short contract when you really need them. The units available here cycle regularly over the course of the game, so check back often to see if there's anything useful. Once a unit is created, they can be rallied to get them ready for combat. Combat in Manor Lords is very simple. You just select your unit and tell them where you want them to move, what you want them to attack, and they'll go and do that. There are several stance options to make them more or less aggressive, and everything here has a trade-off, so it all really depends on the situation they're in and what you're trying to achieve. In combat, units fatigue over time, so even if you have elite troops, they can eventually be overcome by weak units if a battle wages on for long enough. As well as this, you have to worry about morale. If it reaches 0, that unit will flee from battle, likely taking more casualties in the process, not to mention losing whatever ground they were holding. This system is very simple to work with, just apply pressure to enemies by attacking them in the back, overwhelming them with damage and generally making sure they're under constant pressure, and you should break their morale in no time. If this is a bandit camp, you'll be able to walk your troops over to it and claim some resources, clearing the camp from the map in the process. When attacking overlords, things are a little bit more complicated. Fighting their units is the exact same, but there will be a whole lot more of them. At the moment, the AI can't make their own towns, so instead, their armies will just appear when you claim one of their regions or they try to claim one of yours, and you'll need to fight them off to take control. Do this to all of them, and you'll win that particular battle. Easy peasy. If these overlords choose to attack you, you'll want to make sure you're ready. Once you've built the manor building, you'll be able to use the castle building menu to create walls and towers to keep invaders out and attack any that try to get close. Initially, the build area is limited to a small area around the manor, but towers will extend this range, allowing you to cover your whole town if you place enough. This will be an expensive undertaking and require a lot of logs and planks, so just be ready before you get building. This is super janky right now, so I wouldn't rely on it just yet, but once it's working more smoothly, it should be the best way to keep your town safe. If units are lost in combat, you're also losing population in your town, and this will take some time to be replenished. Losing enough fighters can affect the number of your working families, so before committing to battle, make sure you have some wiggle room if things go south, as the last thing you want is a lost battle and a failing village. As well as this, you'll need to make sure you have somewhere to bury the bodies of the fallen, so make sure you build a corpse pit once you're ready to fight. And with that, I think we've covered everything you need to know in this version of Manor. Of course, this game is a work in progress, so chances are most things here will change over time, so if you're watching this in the future, let me know if you need an update. But for now, like, subscribe, and if you want more strategy gaming content, then why not check out my review of the latest DLC for Warhammer 3. Spoilers, he actually did something kind of okay this time.